morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Chapter 19. We are doing the Survey of Life. Remember that in the Survey of Life, remember the strategy that we are using to discuss the survey of living things. And that strategy is least complex to most complex. That's why we started with bacteria, we moved up to protists, and then to plants and fungi, and then finally to animals, because animals are a lot more complex than any of the other groups. In talking about the animals themselves, we're using least complex to most complex, which is why we started with sponges and jellies. And we made our way up through the other groups until we got to our current group, which is Phylum Chordata. One thing, I want you to stop and think back. What was that one group that, if we use this least complex to most complex strategy, what was the one group you really needed to pull out? Because they really mess with that strategy. Do you remember when we talked about the mollusks? Do you remember when we talked about that one particular group of mollusks that really breaks that least complex to most complex strategy? And that group is the cephalopods, because they're by far the most complicated invertebrates on the planet. Easily the smartest, easily the most advanced. If you pluck them out of the mix, then it flows really great from sponges up to chordates. If you leave them in, it kind of messes with it. But that's really good. It's not that it is shattering the strategy. It just goes to show that all the things on the planet today have been on the planet for a really long time. And all have to adapt, and all have adapted to their circumstances. And some adapt to more difficult circumstances and need better adaptations to do so. And the cephalopods were this group that were able to have this great intelligence, this great circulatory system, this greatly very well constructed eye. Cephalopods. All right. Enough about one of my favorite groups of organisms. Let's go on. Let's talk about Phylum Chordata. Remember the strategy: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. The three domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. We're within domain eukarya. Eukarya contains the eukaryotes. From domain eukarya, within domain eukarya, we have four major kingdoms, and those four major kingdoms are plants, fungi, protists, and animals. We've talked about plants, we talked about protists, we talked about fungi, and now we're talking about animals. Kingdom Animalia. Within Kingdom Animalia, we've talked about a bunch of different phyla. We talked about Phylum Porifera, the sponges. We talked about Phylum Cnidaria, the jellies. Now we're up to our most complicated and last phylum, and it is Phylum Chordata, the chordates. To be a chordate, or rather, all chordates have these similar features, and these similar features are all chordates have this structure called a notochord. A notochord is a flexible rod that exists between the spinal cord and the back, the dorsal fin, essentially. Flexible rod running down the back. It is a structure to attach muscles to, so that energy can be conserved, so energy can be stored and released. Imagine a fish swimming. You pull it this way, you pull the flexible rod this way using a muscle. What happens when you let go? It snaps back to the other side. Flexible rod to help with swimming, originally to help with swimming. Next is the dorsal hollow nerve cord. You'd call that your spinal cord. Now be careful. Pause. I'm saying spinal cord. I'm not saying spinal column. When I say spinal cord, you might be thinking these vertebrae that run down your back. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actual spinal cord, the nerve fibers in the center, that if somebody breaks their back, you're terrified. They might be paralyzed, right? Well, that's not necessarily because they broke the bones. It's because those broken bones cut the wires, the spinal cord. Dorsal hollow nerve cord is what it's called. All chordates have to have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. It runs between the notochord and the back. So the dorsal hollow nerve cord is between the notochord and the back. And it runs between the brain and the rest of the body. If you are a chordate, you have to have pharyngeal gill slits. They're actually now referred to as pharyngeal pouches. Your pharynx. When you look in the mirror and you see the back of your throat, and if you touch it, you gag, right? That's your pharynx. If you've ever had milk or juice or tea in your mouth and you laughed, and that milk or juice or whatever it was came out your nose, oh God, that's because of the pharynx. The pharynx is the connection between your nose, your mouth, and your throat. Pharyngeal gill pouches, or pharyngeal pouches, all chordates have these pharyngeal pouches. In fish, those things become the gills, the gill slits. Think of a shark. You know, sharks got those slashes on their neck. That's the gill slits. We obviously don't have slits in our neck. So what happened to our gill pouches? Well, those gill pouches go on to become parts of your throat, like your hyoid bone. Your tongue attaches to the hyoid. Some of it becomes part of your jaw, and a few other structures deep in your neck. And the last thing that all chordates have is a post-anal tail. Think of a dog, think of a cat, think of a fish. A tail that extends beyond the anus. I want us all to stop and think about these four structures we just talked about. A notochord. Do you have a flexible rod running down your back? Well, yeah, I got my vertebral column. No, that's not what a notochord is. A notochord is like a PVC pipe. It's a solid structure. The notochord becomes the spinal column, just like the pharyngeal gill pouches become structures in your neck. The only structure that adult humans, of these four we just said, the only structure that adult humans retain is the dorsal hollow nerve cord. All of these other structures, post-anal tail, notochord, pharyngeal gill pouches, we possess them during development. You can look at fetal development, and we can see this structure that is the notochord, which does turn into the vertebral column. We can see these structures that are the pharyngeal gill pouches, which do turn into these pieces of our jaw and our neck. We can see our post-anal tail, which you've probably heard of people being born with a tail. It does still happen, rarely. We do have remnants of that tail. And several of these structures, not all organisms, not all adult animals, chordates have a post-anal tail. Think of the apes, chimpanzees, gorillas. They don't have tails. They have tails like we do in development. No adult vertebrate has a notochord anymore. All of them it turned into the vertebral column. But all chordates have to have these four structures at some stage of development. Lots of chordates they only possess as an adult the dorsal hollow nerve cord and the post-anal tail. Here we see the main classes of vertebrates that we're going to talk about. Remember, the way this is grouped, it shows the closer together organisms are, the more closely related they are. These are the major groups that we're going to discuss. This is an ancestral population, which that population split in two. One group went on to become these structures called lancelets. We'll talk about them in a bit. The other group went on and gave rise to all of the vertebrates. This group right here split in two. One group stayed and became tunicates. Again, we'll talk about in a little bit. The rest of them went on to form what were called the craniates, the organisms that have a head, lampreys. And each of these each of these branches, there's some structure that all of those organisms possess that the ones before it did not. And we'll talk about all of these groups as we get to them. Our first group of chordates are called tunicates. A tunicate, what is a tunic? A tunic, actually in modern definition, is a tight-fitting shirt, usually that goes down beyond your waist, a tunic. A tunic is a tight-fitting shirt. Tunicates, they are chordates called sea peaches or sea squirts. They've got a tight-fitting epidermis, skin, basically, that holds them all together. These are sessile marine animals. Again, what does sessile mean? Sessile means they don't move around. Marine, what does marine mean? Oh, well, marine means that they live in water. It doesn't just mean they live in water. They live in what kind of water? Marine specifically means they live in salt water. So, tunicates, sea squirts, are mostly sessile marine animals. They're filter feeders. Again, we've finally gotten up to our biggest, most complicated phylum of organisms, the chordates. And what is the life strategy? Our first ones are filter feeders, the most basic life strategy there is. I'm going to filter water, and that's how I eat. They have these four structures in their larval form. The only structure the adult possesses is the gill slits. Here we see a picture of a sea squirt. This is what the adult looks like. It's got that incurrent siphon. We talked about these when we talked about the mollusks, right? Incurrent siphon is where they bring in water. This incurrent siphon goes through the pharyngeal gill slits. This gill basket right here, it's basically just a strainer. It's exactly what it is. It's a strainer. It's a strainer that pulls double duty. It filters the water and it oxygenates their blood, just like what we talked about with clams. This now strained water or filtered water goes out the excurrent siphon. It gets pushed back out again. A sheet of mucus basically is produced, and this sheet of mucus just constantly is flowing down the pharyngeal gill basket, and it goes right down into the stomach. And that mucus is carrying all of the filtered water. It's carrying all of the filtered particles out of the water, the food, down directly into the stomach. Once the stomach has digested it, it releases the waste, and so there is the anus, basically, which releases into the outside of the basket so the waste can be carried right into the excurrent siphon. This is what an adult looks like, and if you would say, is this thing more closely related to you or to a sponge, you'd say, oh, that looks a lot more like a sponge. But no, it is a lot more closely related to us. This is the larval sea squirt down here. What does that thing kind of look like? It looks a little bit like a tadpole, doesn't it? We see all four of the structures in this animal. We see the notochord right here, that flexible rod. Above it, we find that dorsal hollow nerve cord. We've got the pharyngeal gill pouches, which is what this basket comes from. It's right here in the center. And then we have a post-anal tail. So that's a little bit more of a trick. The excurrent siphon is right here, and because the anus is going to dump into that basket, the excurrent siphon kind of counts as its anus, sort of. So the tail that comes off of it is the post-anal tail. So this structure right here is a larval sea squirt. At some point, it will sit down on the ocean floor and will change from this into that and become the adult. And again, this concept of having the structures as a larvae but not as an adult is really common within Phylum Chordata.